When it comes to causing controversy, Gino Jennings is an old hand. He has been at conflict with other Christian denominations and opponents for years because to his fiercely conservative beliefs, such as his non-Trinitarianism, rigorous clothing code, and strong opposition to women in clergy jobs. Even One Nation barred him from using their language because of the passionate disputes his opinions have caused. Confirming everyone's worst concerns, his family has finally come forward. I think it would be helpful to take a brief look at Gino Jennings's path up to this point before we get into the specifics, though. Not long ago was Gino Jennings the fearless and divisive figure that he is now. At first, he did what many children his age do. He would read passages from the Bible to his family during church services. A preacher by the age of 13, Jennings was an outlier. Religious people were always there for Gino Jennings. Praying, studying the Bible, and being active in the church were all aspects of his upbringing in a very religious family. He was profoundly impacted by his father, Bishop Ernest Jennings, combined functions of spiritual advisor, mentor, and role model. And thus it came as no surprise that young Gino felt an early pull towards the pulpit. He began preaching while he was still a teenager, and his passionate and assured speeches made him stand out from his contemporaries. Major steps were taken by Jennings at the age of 21. It was in the Philadelphia basement of his family's home that he laid the groundwork for the first church in 1984. Jennings' stirring sermons on holiness, simplicity of life, and fidelity to the teachings of the Bible propelled the church from its modest beginnings to rapid growth. It didn't take long for his unpretentious approach to gain followers, and what began in a basement soon became a nationwide phenomenon. Keep away from the locals, Jennings. His dream was for his church to have an international impact. He started out in major American cities like New York and Washington, D.C., but as his message spread, he eventually had churches spring up all over the world, including in Canada, Jamaica, the United Kingdom, and even certain regions of Africa. Because his sermons were frequently broadcasted on television and radio, Jennings was able to reach a far wider audience. Yet, Jennings' ascent hasn't been devoid of debate. There has been much discussion about his beliefs, such as his stern stance against homosexuality and divorce and his conviction that women should not be leaders in the church. In his view, mainstream Christianity is increasingly moving away from biblical truth, and he is not shy in criticizing this trend. According to Jennings, a lot of churches have changed their beliefs to comply with contemporary culture. Still, he won't budge from his conventional, uncompromising view of the Bible. Critics and admirers alike have taken issue with Gino Jennings's reputation for a literal reading of the Bible. In particular, his views on gender and morals have caused many to see his inflexible attitude as intolerable and antiquated. The Bible alone, though, is where Jennings' ideas are firmly grounded. Truth, he believes, must be preached, and he doesn't care if it's popular or accepted. Not only does Jennings have strong opinions about gender roles, but he is also an outspoken opponent of the prosperity gospel, the belief that people will be blessed financially, professionally, and physically if they are obedient to God. The idea that Christians can get heavenly rewards for their generous giving to the church has grown popular in certain Christian circles. The gospel message is distorted in Jennings' view, hence he rejects this approach. Prosperity preachers are a common target of his sermons, which he uses to criticize them for what he sees as their promotion of a superficial Christianity that prioritizes worldly success over personal virtue. Christian living, according to Jennings, is not about getting rich or comfortable, but about humbling oneself before God and serving Him. People who think that religion has become too commercialized and has abandoned Jesus' teachings will relate to his criticism of the prosperity gospel. Nevertheless, this positions him in opposition to a number of prominent Christian figures of our day. In particular, Jennings's opinions on humility have caused him no end of criticism. He uses scriptures that exhort women to be modest and reject showy jewelry and hairstyle choices to argue that women should not have short hair, wear makeup, or wear jewelry that draws attention to their hairstyle choices, in order to refrain from worldly pursuits and uphold their sanctity. There has been a lot of pushback against his position, which is not surprising given the importance our culture places on individual liberty and speech. Many people think his beliefs are patriarchal and limiting because they don't give women enough control over their bodies. There has been no wavering on Jennings' part in face of this criticism. His beliefs are firmly rooted in Scripture and unaffected by societal norms or passing fads. Other religious leaders and Jennings have been embroiled in heated public arguments over his stance on these matters. In response to accusations that he is a fundamentalist and a legalism, Jennings has accused his critics of pushing a watered-down form of Christianity. His controversial views have caused division among Christians. He has a reputation for being unyielding, which has caused a schism among his followers and detractors. Constant criticism doesn't deter Jennings from standing firm for his message. In this morally compromised society, he sees himself as a champion of genuine Christian theology. With the weight of public scrutiny and the responsibilities of leading a massive religious organization on his shoulders, Jennings has had to juggle both the call of his ministry and his public persona. Much of his private life remains undisclosed, yet it is typical for influential people like him to face personal tragedies and difficulties. Jennings, a pastor who has devoted his life to his faith, probably draws on his spiritual convictions to help him deal with loss and sadness, but he keeps the emotional toll of juggling his public and private lives mostly hidden from view. Nobody is immune to the trials and tribulations that Jennings, like the rest of us, has undoubtedly endured. That is, for one thing, Jennings frequently stresses that Christians should lean even more heavily on their faith during times of personal tragedy, believing that God is working even when they endure pain. Because of his unwavering encouragement to his followers to see hardship as a component of God's plan for spiritual progress, it is reasonable to assume that this attitude influences how Jennings himself deals with loss. A characteristic of his leadership style is perseverance, which he displays in these lessons. Throughout his ministry, Gino Jennings has stood firm on contentious matters and presented an unwavering interpretation of the Bible. The result has been both a devoted fan base and many outspoken detractors. Media distortion and misinterpretation of his messages has been a major obstacle for him. Jennings' reputation has taken a hit among those who aren't aware with his ministry, despite his dedication to sharing what he sees as the unchangeable truth of the Bible. This is due to his severe delivery and aggressive position on social and theological issues. Much of Jennings's career has been dogged by unflattering media portrayals. Critics find it simple to attack him because of how directly he criticizes contemporary culture and Orthodox Christianity. His larger theological themes are sometimes distorted since media coverage focuses on his more controversial remarks and presents them out of context. This kind of representation has hurt Jennings' reputation, especially among those who only hear about him in the news and not in his sermons. So many people think he's an extremist or radical because of this. Instead of acting like a pastor who boldly proclaims his belief in preserving God's truth, there are those who have been where Jennings is in terms of dealing with media distortion. These days, when discussions about social inclusion and political correctness rule the news, many religious leaders who advocate for counterculture views confront the same kinds of obstacles. Regarding sexual morality, gender norms, and modesty, Jennings' ideas frequently appear antiquated, and those who disagree with him often find his sermons offensive, abrasive, or out of date. Also, Gino Jennings prefers holiness over Christianity because, in his view, many self-proclaimed Christians stray from the principles of the Bible. Many find his extreme religiosity contentious since it implies that only his followers are really faithful. Traditional Christian doctrines are at odds with Jennings' non-Trinitarian views since they maintain that there is only one God, rather than three. An attribute of Jennings' ministry that stands out is his steadfast honesty, even in the face of popular misconceptions and unflattering media coverage. Jennings will not water down his message or change his stance for the sake of popularity. Even though it may cause him some discomfort, he is determined to remain true to his mission and is prepared to face criticism if necessary. That Jennings will not budge from his firm stance in the face of criticism reveals his profound belief that his pastorate requires him to proclaim the truth of God, regardless of how controversial it may be. Notable Jamaican entertainer Mr. Vegas challenged Gino Jennings to a debate in 2018, and Jennings agreed. Much anticipation had built up for the occasion due to Jennings' controversial statements about the appropriate attire and makeup for Christian ladies. The discussion became a huge media spectacle when Mr. Vegas, who disagreed with Jennings' strict interpretation, publicly requested it. The atmosphere during the argument was charged with tension. The comments made by Jennings earlier, which caused the uproar, were played on repeat by Mr. Vegas. A confrontation ensued when Jennings, on the other hand, refused to let the recording be aired. After a physical struggle broke out between Mr. Vegas, members of the church's audiovisual team, and a few associate ministers, security removed him from the auditorium as the situation swiftly became more heated. A video of the dispute went viral on the island of Jamaica and quickly gained international notice after being streamed live on YouTube. Because of the domino effect that this clash had, 2 additional ministers who had agreed to debate Jennings subsequently withdrew their support. This could have been because the situation was too intense. The occurrence brought attention to the fact that Jennings' ministry is divisive and that he has difficulties when he has to explain his opinions in public. Jennings has also encountered a significant obstacle in his confrontation with T.D. Jakes. Gino Jennings and D.M. Notable disagreements between Jakes have centered on their respective theologies and ministry philosophies, which mirror larger disputes within the Christian community. A major source of disagreement between the two is marriages between people of the same sex. Since same-sex marriage, in Jennings' view, goes against biblical principles, he has been outspoken in his opposition to the practice. In contrast, Jakes has taken a broader stance, which Jennings sees as watering down Christian ideals. As a break from Scripture, Jennings sees Jakes' forbearance on matters like LGBTQ+ inclusiveness, and he has criticized Jakes for it. Their divergent views on authenticity and openness to new ideas are another major source of contention, and tackle modern concerns like racial harmony and socioeconomic equity, in sharp contrast to Jennings' fixation on doctrinal purity. When it comes to issues like gender roles and modesty, Jennings isn't afraid to take a stand, and he has mocked Jakes for what he perceives as his efforts to compromise biblical truth for the sake of contemporary society. Jennings has publicly challenged Jakes over their dispute and invited Jakes to debates, accused him of leading his church astray with his erroneous doctrines. While preaching, Jennings has publicly chastised Jakes and challenged him to defend his theological stances. But so far, no substantive discussions have taken place, and the dispute has devolved into a rhetorical battle, fueled by the advocates of both camps' influence in religious media. They have quite different pastoral approaches, and the media and public view this conflict as evidence of that. Many consider Jennings a firebrand because to his aggressive and unyielding style, whereas Jakes is considered more diplomatic and inclusive because of his emphasis on reaching a wider audience. Not only has this difference schismatic within their adherents, but it also mirrors a wider schism in contemporary Christianity over the relevance and application of Scripture in the present world. In addition to his disagreement with TD on top of his confrontation with Steve Harvey. As a result of their public and media-driven disagreements, Gino Jennings and Steve Harvey's divorce and subsequent remarriage became a hotly debated topic. As is typical of such disputes, the crux of the matter is Jennings's inflexible view of biblical marital doctrine. His position is that it is considered adultery to remarry while one's first spouse is still living. This stance demonstrates his unwavering commitment to following the Bible. When applied to actual events, this viewpoint, which has been central to Jennings' teachings, has frequently caused controversy. Celebrity comedian and TV host Steve Harvey, on the other hand, challenged Jennings' dogmatic viewpoint because of his own experience with divorce and remarriage. The remarks made by Jennings struck Harvey as having an accusatory tone, about which he felt was excessively critical and uncaring towards the nuances of contemporary romantic partnerships. Harvey contends throughout their conversation that Jennings' perspective ignores the complexities and challenges that many people have while dealing with marital problems. The public spat between Harvey and Jennings intensified when Harvey was challenged to a formal debate by Jennings. Intense back and forths illustrating their divergent opinions were part of their clashes that went viral online. This conflict not only brought attention to the gap between religious teachings on marriage and modern social mores, but it also lit a fire under the leaders of both camps, who rallied for their respective causes. Divorce and remarriage are contentious topics in Christian culture and religion, and this conflict's aftermath has cast a spotlight on these larger debates. A perfect example of the difficulties religious leaders encounter when confronted with complicated, real-world problems in a dynamic culture is the contrast between Jennings' steadfast position on the authority of the Bible and Harvey's more humane and practical approach to relationships. Time would inevitably come when Gino Jennings' divisive opinions started to have an impact beyond the usual level of criticism. His aggressive sentiments against the LGBTQ+ community led to his 2019 ban from entering Australia, a major blow for him. Jennings' sermons, which were marked by an extreme literalist reading of the Bible, were deemed by the Australian government to be hate speech and inciting to violence. He has regularly spoken out against same-sex marriage and homosexuality in his sermons, which led to this decision. The prohibition, unsurprisingly, triggered heated discussion on religious liberty and free speech. Some said that Jennings should have his right to free speech protected since he was only trying to defend his religious beliefs. His followers argued that his contentious teachings had a firm foundation in his understanding of the Bible. However, detractors argued that Jennings' biased and damaging teachings fostered an environment where the LGBTQ+ group faced hostility. Traditional religious views and modern social values continue to clash, as this issue demonstrated, especially with reference to LGBTQ+ rights. Questions regarding the boundaries and obligations of free speech are echoed in this episode and in society at large. As a result of their activities, the Australian government has become more sensitive to hate speech, and especially when it concerns underrepresented groups. Embracing their values in an increasingly varied and inclusive society is becoming more difficult for religious figures, as the uproar surrounding Jennings' ban highlights. Considering these changes, the predicament of Jennings prompts vital inquiries into how one can, in a multicultural setting, both defend their faith and honor the rights of others. Faith, identity, and the ideals held by society are all complicated topics, and this serves as a reminder of that. There have been many ups and downs, harsh critiques, and inaccurate portrayals of Gino Jennings' life. His unwavering faith and tenacity have propelled him to greater heights as a leader. Regardless of the backlash he received for standing firm on biblical truth, his church grew in both the United States and abroad. He has a strong global influence, which speaks volumes about his devotion and spiritual strength, and he is still a prominent person in his religious community. No matter how difficult things get, Jennings will always be remembered as an ardent preacher of the gospel according to his beliefs. His steadfast devotion to God and the gospel of holiness have cemented his position in the religious world and assured that his influence will go far beyond his church. Defining his ministry for decades, Jennings' message remains powerful, even though he regularly faces opposition from a world that disagrees with his strict interpretations.